The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, painting the Austin sky in shades of peach and lavender. Rachel Thornton stood at the panoramic window of their new home in the upscale Terry-to-Lawn neighborhood, absent-mindedly stirring a glass of white wine. 3 years ago, she and David couldn't have dreamed of such a place, a Victorian mansion overlooking Lake Austin. Back then, they'd been living in a tiny apartment in South Austin, where it was unbearably hot in the summer and cold in the winter. David was just starting his career at Kingsley Investments, and she ruled on the manuscripts of aspiring authors. "Someday we'll have a house of our own," he'd say in the evenings, cuddling with her on the sold-out couch. "A real one, a big one, with a library for your books." He kept his promise. A meteoric rise in the company had changed their lives. Rachel looked around the impeccably furnished living room. Everything here breathed success, from the antique grand piano to the collectible paintings by contemporary artists. A mahogany bookcase nestled in the corner was her little kingdom. Working as an editor at Austin Literary Press gave her creative satisfaction, but the main income for the family came from David. The other day, she'd signed a contract with a promising author of historical novels. "Great job, Rachel," the boss praised. She came home elated, but David barely looked at her, staring at his laptop. "Sorry, honey, important project. Mr. Kingsley is personally overseeing." He had literally lived in the office for the last 6 months. "Important project. Mr. Kingsley is counting on me. Honey, it's a chance for a promotion." These phrases had become commonplace. Rachel understood. In the financial world, competition is high, and the attention of the boss must be earned. A month ago, they'd run into Kingsley at a restaurant. A tall, elegant man of about 45, with a penetrating gaze and impeccable manners. David, what a surprise. His hand lingered on her husband's shoulder a little longer than necessary. "Will you join us?" David declined, but he'd been distracted all evening. The phone vibrated. Another message from her husband. "Sorry, I'll be late. Robert wants to discuss the quarterly report. Don't wait up with dinner." Rachel sighed. David used to refer to his boss exclusively as Mr. Kingsley. When had that changed? She'd noticed other changes lately. A new perfume, tart, woody, not at all like his usual fresh scent. Expensive sapphire cufflinks, a gift from the company for special favors, as David had explained. Increased business dinners and conferences, strange absent-mindedness and constant phone checking. On Sunday, they had a barbecue by the pool, a tradition they'd never broken before. David kept getting distracted by his phone. "Sorry, work stuff." That evening, she found a red wine stain on his shirt. "Had lunch with clients," he tossed carelessly. David hated red wine, but Kingsley, she knew, favored it specifically. Rachel set down her glass and walked over to the dressing table. Among the knickknacks was their wedding picture. She and David on the beach in Malibu, young in love, confident about the future. They'd vowed then to always be honest with each other. She ran her finger along the glass. 5 years ago, everything had seemed simple and straightforward. The sound of a car pulling up pulled her out of her reverie. David was back earlier than usual. She heard him talking on the phone in the hallway. "Yes, of course. No, she has no idea. Same time tomorrow?" His voice sounded soft, intimate, the way he had only spoken to her before. Rachel froze, clutching the picture frame. For the first time in their life together, she was truly afraid. Another month passed. David seemed to drift further and further away, immersed in his work and frequent meetings with Robert Kingsley. Outwardly, everything remained perfect. Expensive gifts, social gatherings, family dinners on Sundays. Last week, he gave her diamond earrings. "You deserve the best," he'd said, without looking her in the eye. Rachel's first thought was, could this be compensation? For what? She began to notice the looks from other wives at company parties. Sympathetic, understanding, like they knew something she didn't, or didn't want to know. But Rachel could physically feel the chasm growing between them. At night, she lay awake, listening to her husband's steady breathing, and wondered, when had everything changed? At what point had their perfect life become a stage set? And then the headaches and fever began. By the end of the second week of relentless fever, Rachel realized something was wrong. Chronic fatigue turned her work days into torture. She was losing weight despite her normal appetite. At night, she woke up in a cold sweat, and in the morning, she could hardly get out of bed. The publisher noticed her condition. "Why don't you take a vacation?" suggested the supervisor. "You look exhausted." But Rachel refused. Work remained the only anchor in a reality that was becoming increasingly shaky. The new novel she was editing told the story of a woman discovering that her perfect life was built on lies. Rachel caught herself overreacting to every scene of betrayal. The red marks in the margins became more and more jarring, as if her own pain was breaking through them. David seemed oblivious to her condition. He was spending more and more nights at the city apartment the company rented for late-night employees. "Honey, you realize there's a new project. Deadlines are looming." His voice on the phone sounded distant, as if his thoughts were somewhere far away. One day, she stopped by his office with a home-cooked lunch. It used to be their little tradition on Wednesdays. The secretary said Mr. Thornton was in a meeting with Mr. Kingsley. Rachel waited an hour in her husband's empty office. Containers of food were cooling on the desk. Notifications of new messages flashed on the computer screen. One caught her eye. Robert K., waiting at 8 at the usual place. She left, leaving her lunch untouched. The first visit to Dr. Martin Shaw was inconclusive. Blood tests showed slight abnormalities, but nothing critical. "Probably the effects of stress and overwork," the doctor said, prescribing vitamins and recommending more rest. At home, Rachel found David's shirt in the laundry basket, not the one he'd left in that morning. There was a trace of someone else's cologne on the collar. In the pocket is a check from La Luna for $2. Dinner time was 9 p.m. when he was supposedly in a meeting. A month later, a rash appeared. First a small one on his chest, then it started spreading all over his body. At night, the itching became unbearable. Rachel stood under hot showers for hours, trying to stop the burning, not just on her skin, but inside. Their bedroom now smelled like someone else's perfume, not her floral perfume, but something tart and woody. David began using a separate bathroom. "It's more convenient when I come home late," he explained. New shaving products and aftershave appeared on the shelf, all clearly not her choice. Rachel made a follow-up appointment. In the waiting room, she leafed through a glossy magazine and suddenly came across a photo from a charity event. Robert Kingsley surrounded by staff. David stood just behind him, almost invisible. But her gaze caught his hand, just touching his boss's back. An intimate, possessive gesture. Dr. Shaw scrutinized the new symptoms. Something disturbing flashed in his gaze. "Mrs. Thornton, I'd like to order additional tests. It's standard procedure, just to rule out certain possibilities." In the lab, a nurse took several tubes of blood. Rachel noticed an HIV test among the directions, but didn't pay much attention to it. Such tests were part of routine screening. Waiting for the results turned into torture. Rachel immersed herself in her work, trying to distract herself from her anxious thoughts. The publisher was preparing to release a new novel that needed serious editing. She stayed late at the office, as David's and her schedule now coincided. The evening before the doctor called, she found an envelope in the mailbox. Inside were pictures. David enters an expensive hotel. Kingsley follows him 5 minutes later. Signed at the bottom, "You should know." The handwriting seemed familiar, similar to the handwriting in the business memos she'd once passed for her husband through Kingsley's secretary. The call from Dr. Shaw came on Friday evening. "Mrs. Thornton, you need to come to the clinic immediately. There are results that need to be discussed immediately." Dr. Shaw's office had always seemed cozy to Rachel. Bright walls, framed diplomas, pictures of the family on the desk. Right now, however, she felt trapped in here. "Sit down, please." The doctor spoke softly, but his face was serious. "The results showed the presence of HIV infection. We ran a retest to rule out a mistake. Unfortunately, the diagnosis was confirmed." The world around them swam. Rachel heard the doctor's voice as if through a column of water. "State-of-the-art treatments, quality of life, therapy should be initiated, partner should be evaluated." Partner, David, her husband, with whom they were planning to have a baby next year, who, as recently as yesterday, was talking about buying a bigger house. "For a future nursery, honey." How, how is that possible? Her voice shook. Yeah, we only have each other. Dr. Shaw looked at her with compassion. Mrs. Thornton, the virus could have been in your system for months before symptoms appeared. It's important that your husband get tested as soon as possible. She drove home on autopilot. Scraps of phrases swirled in her head, the strange coincidences of the last few months adding up to a frightening picture. Late meetings, the separate apartment, a new perfume, Robert. She spotted a billboard at a stoplight, an advertisement for a new play at the City Theater. Kingsley was a major donor to the theater company. His picture adorned the billboard, an elegant, confident man. Philanthropist of the Year, the caption read. Rachel remembered how David couldn't take his eyes off him at the premiere a year ago. Rachel parked in front of the house and pulled out her cell phone. Instead of calling her husband, she opened the search engine. Robert Kingsley, the name of David's boss, appeared on the screen. The socialite chronicles were peppered with photos of the successful financier at charity events. Bachelor, philanthropist, patron of the arts. An article from 3 years ago caught her eye. An interview in a real estate magazine, Kingsley was talking about his mansion in suburban Austin. In one of the photos, he was standing by the pool. Next to him was a young man whose face was partially hidden by sunglasses. The caption read, Robert Kingsley with a friend. Rachel enlarged the photo. On the friend's neck, she could see a tattoo, a small star, exactly the same as Kingsley's previous personal assistant, who had abruptly quit a year ago. She opened the day planner on her phone and started looking through the entries for the past 6 months. David's business dinners, conferences, late-night meetings. The events were adding up into a clear pattern. You've noticed it too, haven't you? An unexpected voice made her flinch. Standing by the car was Amanda, Kingsley's former secretary who had quit 3 months ago. I'm sorry to startle you. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time. The Magnolia Cafe on the outskirts of Austin was exactly the kind of place where two women could talk without the risk of running into acquaintances. Amanda looked exhausted but determined. I worked for Kingsley for 4 years. She stirred the sugar in her cooled coffee nervously. Saw it happen time after time. Young, promising employees, special attention from the boss, rapid career advancement, and then the broken marriages and broken destinies. Rachel listened, clutching the diagnostic report from the clinic in her hands. Amanda continued. Kingsley is a predator. He chooses married men. It's his special pastime. Seduce, subjugate, destroy the family. Your David is the fourth. Why did you leave? The final straw was Jason Foster, Kingsley's assistant before your husband. His wife. She killed herself when she found out the truth, and Robert just found a new victim. After her conversation with Amanda, Rachel began to keep a close eye on her husband, every move he made, every call he made, every encounter. Everything added up to a mosaic of betrayal. She installed a location tracking app on his phone when David left it unattended during a rare breakfast together. The simple statistics spoke for themselves. Over the past month, David had spent more time at the Kingsley Investments office than he had at home. But what really caught Rachel's attention was his regular visits to the fashionable Westlake neighborhood where Robert Kingsley's mansion was located. On Friday, she decided to follow her husband. Parking her car 2 blocks from the office, Rachel watched David leave the building with Kingsley around 11 p.m. They got into the boss's black Mercedes and headed toward Westlake. Following them at a safe distance, Rachel felt every beat of her heart echo with pain. Kingsley's car stopped at the gates of the luxurious mansion. The guard recognized the boss and let the car through without question. Rachel parked on a nearby street and pulled out her phone. The geolocation showed David at Kingsley's house. She sat in the car until 3 in the morning, until the beacon showed movement toward their house. The next day, she arranged a chance meeting with Kingsley's former personal assistant, the same young man with the star tattoo. After 2 glasses of wine, he got to talking. History repeated itself. Kingsley had seduced him, promised him a golden mountain, and then ruthlessly dumped him when a new target appeared. After a week of observation, Rachel had accumulated enough evidence. She picked an evening when David got home earlier than usual and placed the geolocation printouts, photos of his car outside Kingsley's mansion, and the results of her tests in front of him. What's this? David turned pale as he looked at the documents. This, dear, is a story about how my husband regularly spends nights at his boss's house, and about how that same husband infected me with HIV. A heavy silence hung. David sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. How long ago? Rachel's voice was ringing with restrained rage. 6 months, he answered in almost a whisper. Robert, he has a knack for persuasion. At first it was just hints, casual touches. Then it was special attention, promotions, and then you became his lover, Rachel finished, and decided not to use protection with me because, why, David? I didn't know. He raised his tearful eyes to her. I swear I didn't know about HIV. Robert only told me a month ago. He's on therapy, said the risk is minimal. Minimal? Rachel laughed hysterically. I'm dying, David, slowly but surely, and you're dying with me. Dr. Shaw has confirmed you're infected too. She pulled a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses from her bag. Shall we drink to love, darling? To your beautiful career and my ruined future? David watched in silence as she filled the glasses. Rachel, we can get good treatment. Modern medicine. Shut up. She handed him the glass. Just shut up and drink, to your precious Robert. They drank in silence. David didn't notice as she pulled a small vial from her pocket and discreetly added its contents to the bottle. Shall I pour some more? Rachel asked, and her husband nodded. As she filled the glasses, scraps of memories flashed through her mind. Their first meeting at the bookstore, the wedding on the coast, plans for children. It all seemed like a distant dream now. Tell me about him, Rachel said, leaning back in her chair. Tell me how it started. David took a big sip. It was at a corporate retreat in Hill Country. Robert suggested we discuss my potential in the company. We drank, had a lot of drinks. And you fell in love with him? Her voice sounded surprisingly calm. Yeah, don't know, maybe. He has a way of making a person feel special, like the whole world revolves around you. What about me? I used to make you feel special too. David reached for the bottle, filling his glass for the 3rd time. You don't understand. This is different. With him, it was more intense, more dangerous, like a drug. And for that drug, you risked my life? Rachel leaned forward. When he told you about his diagnosis, why didn't you stop? I tried. David jumped up, but immediately staggered and grabbed the back of his chair. God, something doesn't feel right. Sit down, Rachel said softly. The whiskey's strong. I really tried to break up with him, David continued, sinking heavily into the chair. But he threatened to ruin my career. He has dirt, records, photographs. And you continued to sleep with me, knowing you could infect me? I hoped, that it would be okay. His speech was becoming slurred. Rachel, I'm really sick. Should we call a doctor? You just need to rest. She stood up and walked over to the window. You know, I was hoping for something too, that it was a mistake, that the tests were wrong, that you'd explain everything. I'm sorry, David whispered. His eyes were closing. I messed up. Yes, you did. Rachel watched him slowly slump in his chair. But I'll fix it. I promise. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Mr. Kingsley? It's Rachel Thornton. We need to meet. It's about David and your little secret. Robert Kingsley's body was discovered in his mansion early Sunday morning. The housekeeper, arriving at 8 o'clock as usual, found him in his study. At first glance, it seemed that the successful financier had simply fallen asleep at his desk, his head crossed, a half-drunk glass of whiskey beside him. Only the glazed look in his eyes and the unnatural color of his skin told a different story. Detective Kate Morgan arrived on the scene 40 minutes after the call. She immediately noted the unusual cleanliness of the office. No prints, no signs of struggle. A glass of whiskey, a half-empty bottle, a file folder on the desk. Everything looked almost staged. What do we got? She asked the CSI. At first glance, it looks like a heart attack, the man replied, putting away his equipment. But there's something odd about the whiskey smell. We'll send it to toxicology. Kate looked around the office. The safe was open, but not cracked. Someone knew the code. Inside were the usual documents, except for one folder marked personal. It contained photos and a thumb drive. "Check the cameras," she ordered, "and interview all the staff, especially security. I want to know who visited him yesterday." The camera footage showed two visitors. At 19:30, David Thornton, the company's financial analyst. He stayed about an hour. At 22:15, a woman in a dark cloak and wide-brimmed hat, no face visible. The guard confirmed the visits. Mr. Thornton was a frequent visitor to the boss's place, and I hadn't seen the woman before. Said she had an appointment. By late afternoon, the first toxicology results came back. Kingsley's blood glucose was found to be critically low, a sure sign of insulin overdose. They found traces of sleeping pills in the whiskey from the glass. "Where's Thornton now?" Kate asked her partner. "At the hospital. Came in last night with acute poisoning. His wife called an ambulance." Kate frowned. "Wife? The same Rachel Thornton? The editor?" "That's the one. Said the husband had been drinking a lot and was feeling ill." At the hospital, David Thornton was still too weak to be questioned, but his medical history was quite interesting. In addition to the poisoning, the chart showed a positive HIV test. Kate requested information on Rachel Thornton. Turns out she tested positive for HIV a month ago too. Positive. At the Thorntons' apartment, the detective was greeted by an elegant woman with a tired face. "Mrs. Thornton, tell me about last night." "David came home about 9 o'clock. We drank whiskey, talked. Then he started to feel sick, so I called an ambulance." "What did you talk about?" "About work, about his boss, Mr. Kingsley." Rachel was quiet. "You know about their connection, don't you? And about Robert infecting my husband with HIV?" Kate looked at her interlocutor carefully. "How can you be so sure?" "I have proof. Photographs, correspondence. Robert liked to collect dirt on his lovers. I found the documents in his safe last night." "You were at his house?" "Yes, after David went into the hospital. I wanted to talk." "What time?" "Around 10. Rachel stood up and walked over to the window. "You know, Detective, when I found out about the diagnosis, I thought it was the end. But then I realized it's just the beginning of the end for the people who ruined my life." "Is that a confession?" "It's a statement of fact. Robert Kingsley was a monster who used and discarded people. Ask his former assistant, Jason Foster. Or his widow. Oh yeah, she killed herself. Ask Amanda, his former secretary. They'll tell you a lot of interesting things." Kate noticed several insulin packs and syringes on the table. The standard diabetics kit. "Diabetes?" She nodded at the medications. "A consequence of the HIV infection. Had to learn how to give injections." Rachel shrugged nonchalantly. "Funny how life teaches you new things." That evening, Kate was reviewing the case file in her office: crime scene photos, forensic results, witness statements. On the desk was a thumb drive from Kingsley's safe. Dozens of files documenting his communications with his subordinates, records, photos, threats. Her thoughts were interrupted by a call from the lab. David Thornton's system also showed critically low glucose levels, but not fatal. Someone's good with dosages, Kate thought. Enough knowledge to take one out and kill the other. She opened the surveillance file. The woman in the dark cloak was walking up the steps of the Kingsley mansion again and again. Kate Morgan sat in her office, staring at the evidence board. 3 weeks of investigation and finally a lead. On the desk were 2 medical records. David Thornton, routine checkup 3 months ago. Elevated blood sugar, but the patient wasn't informed. The results got lost in the paperwork. Pre-diabetic condition. "That's why he survived," Kate murmured. His body was already producing excess insulin. The dose that killed Kingsley wasn't enough for him. She pulled out the toxicology report. In addition to insulin, they found traces of a strong sleeping pill in Kingsley's blood. In the bottle of whiskey, the same. "Detective Morgan?" A young officer peered through the door. "Found the pharmacy where the insulin was purchased. Prescription was written for Rachel Thornton, but she never used it." "Of course she didn't use it." Kate stood up, looking at the crime scene photos. "She never had diabetes. She got the prescription so she could have access to insulin. It was all planned." Kate began to piece together the events of that night. "Yeah, you're right. Let's rewrite this fragment in more detail and logic, building on what has happened in previous chapters." Kate reconstructed the events of that night. 22:15. The cameras recorded a female figure in a dark cloak ascending the steps of the Kingsley mansion. In her hands was a file folder. "Mr. Kingsley, we need to talk about my husband and about your special attention to your employees." They sit in his office. He's cocky as ever. He offers a whiskey, the same Macallan he keeps for special guests. She accepts. As he pulls out glasses, her hand lingers over his glass for a moment. The conversation goes on for almost an hour, about David, about the diagnosis, about how easy it is to ruin someone else's life. Kingsley begins to lose concentration, blinking more than usual. His speech becomes slurred. When he loses consciousness, Rachel looks around the office. The safe is her main target, but she doesn't know the code. She methodically searches the desk, the drawers. In the top drawer is a leather-bound day planner. Between the pages is a piece of paper with numbers on it. Typical self-confidence. Who would dare search his house? In the safe is a collection of his trophies. Photos, notes, threats. She takes the folder labeled personal. In her purse, insulin, bought with a fake prescription. One shot, quick, precise. In the neck, where the mark will be less noticeable. At home, same pattern. Whiskey, sleeping pills, insulin. But David survives because of his own pre-diabetes, which no one knew he had. His body, accustomed to high sugar levels, handled a dose that should have been fatal. "An accident," Kate said aloud. "All perfectly planned, but it was an accident that saved him." She pulled up the security footage of the clinic where Rachel had gotten her insulin prescription. 3 visits, complaints of fatigue, dizziness, classic symptoms of diabetes, or a skillful imitation. "Detective," the partner walked into the office. "There, you need to see this." Kingsley's email was open on his tablet. A letter sent an hour before his death. "Dear Mrs. Thornton, I understand your feelings. But believe me, it was consensual. David is a grown man. He made his choice. As for your diagnosis, I'm sorry. I really am. But we all know the risks. Let's discuss compensation. Name an amount, RK." "He thought he could pay it off." Kate shook her head. "As he has from all the previous ones." Footsteps were heard in the hallway. Rachel Thornton entered without knocking, elegant, calm, with a folder of documents in her hands. "I've come to make a statement." She sat down across from Kate. "A full confession." "Why now?" "Because the story must be told properly, not about revenge, about justice." She pulled pictures out of a folder. Kingsley with various men, his collection, threatening letters, bank transfers, payment for silence. He collected them like trophies. Married men are his favorite prey. Seduce, subdue, blackmail. And when they get bored, he finds new ones. And insulin? Poetic justice. He was slow to kill people morally. I chose the fast way. But David? He was your husband. He betrayed me twice, first by cheating, then by keeping silent about his diagnosis. He knew about his HIV status. He knew about Kingsley, but he kept sleeping with me, risking my life. You wanted to kill him. I did, but fate had it differently. Rachel smiled. Funny, isn't it? He was saved by a disease he didn't know he had. Kate pulled out the handcuffs. "Rachel Thornton, you're under arrest for the murder of Robert Kingsley and the attempted murder of David Thornton." "You know, Detective." Rachel held out her hands. "Sometimes justice demands a crime. I have no regrets." The prison library smelled of dust and old books. Rachel ran her fingers along the spine of the copy of her book she had just brought in. A Tale of Love and Betrayal had been on the New York Times bestseller list for 6 weeks. Critics had called it a piercing study of human nature and a merciless dissection of modern marriage. She grinned, remembering the rave reviews. None of the critics realized that every word was true. The story, told in the third person, seemed like fiction to everyone. The author masterfully weaves together themes of love, betrayal, and revenge, wrote the Austin Chronicle's literary reviewer. Her editor, now a former editor, insisted on changing the ending. "It's too grim," he said. "Readers want hope." But Rachel refused. Some stories don't deserve a happy ending. Letters from readers came in droves. Women shared their stories of betrayal, thanked for their honesty, their courage to talk about the uncomfortable. Men wrote less often, but their letters were more poignant. They recognized themselves in the characters, and it scared them. In Seattle, David Thornton was trying to start a new life. He worked as a financial consultant in a small firm. No corporations, no overbearing bosses. Every morning began with a handful of pills, antiretroviral therapy, insulin, antidepressants. His new apartment overlooked the bay, but he rarely looked at the water, too reminiscent of Lake Austin and their old house. At night he was haunted by the same dream, a glass of whiskey on the table, the familiar tart smell of sleeping pills he didn't have time to recognize. Rachel standing at the window, elegant, calm, with a barely perceptible smile. "To love?" she asks, raising her glass. He woke up in a cold sweat, gasping with fear and guilt. The therapist advised him to write letters. To Rachel, to Robert, to his old self. To spit out everything that hadn't been said. David wrote hundreds of letters but never sent a single one. What do you say to a woman you betrayed twice? How do you explain that you loved them both, her and Robert, each in their own way, and that only made the betrayal worse? Robert Kingsley was buried in the family plot in Austin Cemetery, an expensive monument, a pathos epitaph about a prominent businessman and philanthropist. No mention of the lives he ruined, the men he seduced and abandoned, the wives whose marriages he turned into ruins, the HIV he infected his lovers with under the guise of minimal risk and modern therapies. In Detective Kate Morgan's office, the stack of papers on her desk grew taller and taller. The new case seemed to mirror the old. Different financier, different victims, but the same MO. Power, manipulation, ruined lives. Only now she knew where to look, what questions to ask, what clues to look for. Sometimes she pulled out the Thorntons' case file. She'd reread the statements, look at the crime scene photos. It was all so obvious if you knew where to look. A perfectly planned murder disguised as an insulin overdose. The perfect poison. Would have been perfect if it hadn't been for David's accidental diabetes. In the evenings, after work, Kate often stopped by a small bar near the precinct. One day, she saw a woman there who looked remarkably like Rachel. The same elegant posture, the same attentive eyes. The woman was drinking whiskey and reading a book. On the cover, Kate caught a familiar title, A Tale of Love and Betrayal. In a women's prison in the state of Texas, Rachel Thornton began writing a new book. A story about a woman who administers justice with her own hands, about the fine line between revenge and justice, about how love can turn into the worst kind of poison. She wrote at night when the prison was quiet. The words fell to paper in smooth lines, forming a new confession. She knew that this book would also be called piercing and merciless, but only she would know the truth. Every line was a letter to David, a letter he would never read. And somewhere in Austin, in another posh office, another powerful man was seducing his married subordinate. History was repeating itself, only the setting was different, and Detective Morgan knew. Sooner or later, a new case would appear on her desk, because some stories never end. The sun was